Welcome everyone back to the arena. Today we've got Esin Pinarli, who is a holistic psychotherapist and coach. She is a business owner and she helps individuals, couples, and families navigate life's challenges to feel fully alive, supported, and whole. I always like to start the conversation, well, one by thanking you, Esin, of course.
Well,
but asking,
thank you for
who
having
is
me
Esin
on.
Pinarli? And I'm going to do that. But I want to ask, and this is just a type of the moment thing, as I read that, to feel fully alive. How does someone feel, how do they know when you feel fully alive?
You're experiencing, I call it a sensational odyssey. So you're feeling kind of, you feel all of it as opposed to numbing it, right? So when we numb things, however which way we numb, through relationships, through drugs, alcohol, work, we can't selectively numb. We numb the joy, we numb the aliveness, we numb the, so you can't just numb the pain. You can't just numb the discomfort. So when people actually start to access the pain, they get more access to joy. And so then they start to feel more alive and they start to feel even their cells vibrating on a different frequency. They're on this healing journey or they're discovering these things about themselves, and it's giving them access to joy because they were medicating that. And the joy is what makes you feel alive. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like music makes me feel alive, right? Certain music, I danced my whole life. Dancing makes me feel alive. A cold plunge, I'm like a really big cold plunger. And before it was like a thing, like only when it was like Wim Hof, like only very few select people knew about it. And I felt just alive. I'm like, there's something to this. And I think it's feeling alive is feeling all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then the parts that are uncomfortable that you feel. I think being able to allow it to pass through you and not being so scared of discomfort and anxiety, pain, depression, whatever your feeling is. And I think when people navigate through those emotions and they realize that the fear of feeling those emotions are actually often scarier than the actual experience of feeling it. Not that it's not painful, because it is. It's not for the faint of heart. You have to really kind of face yourself, right? What are these parts that you've repressed that you thought are unacceptable to the world? Or maybe you were authentically yourself to your peers or your primary caregivers, mom or dad, and it was met with, be quiet, go to your room, rejection, disapproval. You learned how to silence that voice because it wasn't being accepted. So you're always going to choose connection over authenticity. It's like built into your nervous system because you want to protect yourself. Your whole body is a self-protective mechanism. So when you start to feel those parts that you push down because it was met with rejection, you do start to come alive. And that's painful but liberating at the same time. So you're kind of, people always say this, that healing is a not linear, it's a spiral. I don't even see it as, I see it as like this odyssey, this sensational odyssey you go through, like ups and downs, and it doesn't like spiral upward, and you don't ascend. It's not a portal to bliss automatically, but it is a portal to self-actualization, which is who you are truly always meant to be. And it's about reclaiming the lost parts of yourselves.
And so, with that wonderful intro, who is Esin Pinarli?
Oh God, that's such a loaded question, right? Who am I, right? You asked me that how many years ago, I would have some other defining characteristics. Who am I? A conscious being that tries to be of service to other people, that tries to be compassionate, and I call compassion love in action. I try to like feel that so I can be that and be able to give that to my clients, to the people I love. And then if you want to get a little more historical, I'm, a therapist who went to college, studied in undergrad and was very drawn to psychology classes. I mean, literally, like the first class I took, I was like, this, I want to know more. Uh, so I grew up in New York, as you can tell with my accent, probably it comes out. And then I've actually am in South Florida now for almost 16 years. Who else am I? I'm sober. I would say that's one of the things about me. I used to drink alcohol. I don't anymore. About 16 years. August 1st will be with no alcohol, drugs, anything like that. I try to help people as much as I can. I like to have fun. I like to laugh. I like to, you know, travel, and and that's it's a loaded question, right? Like, because your identity, like, am I a therapist? Like, I'm also a human being having a spiritual experience, right? And I'm like living this life, and these are some defining characteristics about what role I play in the world, or what I feel that my purpose is. But I'm multidimensional like everybody else. I'm also very deep. I'm also very analytical. Since I'm a young girl, I was actually talking to somebody about this. My dad bought me a shirt when I was a young girl that said "why" on it, because I was always asking why. I was like, why is the sky blue? Why is this that? Like, I always wanted to know why. So there was always this, like, curiosity. I remember thinking, I remember being in my own mind. I must have been maybe 11, thinking, does everybody think like this? Because this is exhausting. So what I came to realize was I was a very hyper vigilant, deep thinker, and a big reader. I was a big reader. I've been reading since I was an English literature major too. I double majored in psychology and English literature. And so I think that curiosity about other people, and in stories, but also in real life. I'm just really curious about people. Why do you do what you do? How do you feel? How do you emote your emotions? Like, what's your story? So I think that kind of little bit encompasses it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the spirit of curiosity, help us understand, like, sort of inflection point in your life where you felt the biggest transformative shift from, I know in talking to you before the conversation, you used to be in a sorority, you used to party pretty hard. Today you're sober, you're, a therapist. Not to say that you can't be in a sorority and be a therapist, right? But, like, walk us through just sort of like that transformative journey, but, like, touching on, like, that inflection point of, like, what did that rock bottom look like? And at what point were you starting to see the world and see your life within that world in a different light?
So, I mean, the Greek life that I was in with the sorority, in college, was just party city. I mean, and I was having fun until I wasn't, right? There was a lot of good times, but there came a point where I was like I was starting to become anxious and depressed, and recognizing that it really wasn't serving me, but I didn't really know any other way to live. And so I think in my college years, I started to get, like, an inkling that I don't really drink like other people. Like, I kind of fit in because I was partying with all the sororities. I was a social chair and everything, but it felt a little different. There was something off about it. It felt like I drank a little bit more. It felt like I got a little bit more, I almost felt like I was allergic to it in some sense of the word. And so I think it progressively got worse, where, when I say worse, meaning it wasn't that fun anymore, where I would drink in my room by myself, and it went from, like, yes, I would socially drink, but I would also drink in my room, or if I was off from school. And so I felt like it got dark there for a little while. And I was having, challenges in my relationships. I remember a boyfriend I was dating, I found a card in his room. He was in a fraternity, I was in a sorority. How to stop the one you love from drinking. And I was like, he was secretly seeing a therapist to cope with what he had noticed was like an excessive amount of drinking, but like I'm in the scene, right? I'm the social chair, we're partying, it's kind of normal, but he's my boyfriend and we're intimate, and he's recognizing like he's secretly getting help from a therapist on how to manage how to stop the one you love from drinking without really telling me. So there was always like these little signs, and it's like the people who would party hard would say stuff to me like, I don't think you should drink. And I'm like, these people that are drinking like this are telling me that they don't think I should drink. And so there was a lot of defining moments. I mean, I would say, instead of a rock bottom where a lot of people could say like, I did get arrested, I drank and drove, and I don't remember it. I read it in the police report. Thank God nothing happened to anybody. I don't know if you guys remember, you seem young, but remember Juicy Couture? Mm-hmm. Like the juicy outfits, yeah. Right? All right. So I had like I had all of them. The juicy on the bum. I had like I had the terry cloth yellow set. I had every set, And I remember getting a phone call. I was in a blackout. I was going through a breakup with a different boyfriend, and I probably had drank a bottle of wine at home. And I was doing my master's degree, and my friend had called me to come down to the bars that were like near my home in New York. And I drove down these windy roads, and I hit a car, and that car, I propelled off of that car and did a U-ey, and I sideswiped the cop car. And so I woke up handcuffed to a hospital bed with the cop on the scene was a guy that was older than me that knew me. So he was like, hey, he's like, try to stay here as long as you can. He's like, I would have tried to help you. He's like, but once you hit another cop car, he's like, all bets are off. And I went to jail. And that was like mortifying. And I was, handcuffed to another girl in a van, in a steel metal, where the toilet bowl was in the middle of, it was mortifying. I was like, I cannot believe, I was like, well, how did I end up here? You would think that would be rock bottom. Oh no. The shame and I was like, I went to jail? Like what? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I drank around that, like to try to forget that happened. And so I think it was just a slow erosion of feeling more and more like not content, not happy, anxious, depressed, feeling like I wasn't living up to my potential, feeling like there's got to be more to this. And it's like I don't know how to live with it in my life anymore, but I also don't know what is my life going to look like. Like if I stop drinking, what do I do? I don't know any other way to live. This has been my lifestyle. I did it in high school, I did it in college.
So what was what do you think the pain was that you were attempting to numb, like high level, right? Like, or not high level, but like all encompassing, like where did it root all back to in your life in terms of, because you talked about earlier, you're numbing the pain, you're numbing everything. What did you discover for yourself that you were really numbing or running away from? Anxiety
all day long. It was this like feeling of irritable, restless, and discontent, they call it. And so it's like, well, where did that come from? Why was I experiencing that? And it was, I didn't know what it was. And if you were to ask me years ago, I would be like, I grew up in an amazing family, in an upper class neighborhood in New York. Mom and dad are married multiple years. They're both my best friends. But through doing my own work, I recognized that I was trained for this role as a therapist since I was 7. I basically was managing, I don't know if you guys are familiar with attachment styles. So I was basically managing an avoidant dad with an anxious mother's romantic relationship. And so I learned that if I went into, they'd be in a fight and they wouldn't be talking, and I would feel the tension. I didn't know all of this, right? But if you had dysregulated primary caregivers or parents, you feel that tension. You feel the energy in the household. If mom and dad are arguing, I had friends who were, products of divorce. I didn't want to be, like, I was petrified of being a child of divorce. So it was like, I made it my mission to make sure I kept them together. I didn't know I was doing all of this, right? It's all like hindsight. And so I became their therapist at like 7 years old, and I'm a couples counselor. Couples counselor is like one of my main modalities. And so basically, I'd go in one room and talk to my mother and tell her, I think what he really meant to say was this. And then I knew exactly what they needed. So I was always taking their emotional temperature, and I was always feeling probably like this relationship could break apart at any moment. Where would that leave me? And that comes down to my own safety, right? I need them to be together for me to feel safe. I don't want to be a product of divorce. And I don't want them fighting, and I want this tension to go away. And so I learned, it got reinforced. Every time I did that, they made up. And so then I kept doing that. And so what do you think happens to my nervous system? I become hypervigilant. I become completely aware of people's emotions. I'm tracking. And this is all happening below conscious awareness, right? We have this internal surveillance system going on inside of us. It's called neuroception. Stephen Porges, which is the creator of polyvagal theory, which is something that I'm trained in, is all like nervous system work. And so it's not perception. It's literally felt, like on a felt sense level. It is this internal surveillance system that's constantly scanning. Is it safe or dangerous? Are you safe, Matt, or dangerous? Are you safe, Matt, MD? Like my body will automatically do that. We all do it. But if at a young age you had to do something like that, that surveillance is like on fleek, right? And so you grow up like that, taking other people's emotional temperatures, and then there's probably becomes a part of me that was like people pleasing and codependent and like making sure everybody liked me, and the drinking made me the life of the party, and it made me, popular, and and so it was like this like pattern of pleasing or fixing, and that hypervigilance that it created inside of me probably created a dysregulated nervous system, and they probably weren't regulated enough to co-regulate with me. And for anyone who doesn't know what co-regulation is that somebody like soothes you, or they see that you're upset or you're distressed, and their nervous system relaxes your nervous system, so you can then internalize that feeling, and then you learn how to self-regulate. So many people don't know how to self-regulate, right? We get reactive, we respond, we get triggered, we get activated by people. It's because like there's this skill which is called self-regulation, but you have to have co-regulation in order to internalize that self-regulation, and then it becomes this skill set that helps you move in the world. So if I'm always hypervigilant and I'm always taking the temperature of my parental figures who are supposed to be taking care of me, which they were, food, shelter, love, of course, but there was a hypervigilance, I think, that carried over with me and created this dysregulated nervous system that was hyper tuned into everything.
So I've always been curious, because I want to go back to like the 7-year-old, because this is where it starts stemming from, which is you've developed this fear that ultimately leads to taking a responsibility for your parents' marriage, which only can create so much trauma because that's wildly out of your control. I feel like I'm, speaking to myself in some ways. Oddly similar experience there, but I guess like being a therapist, and I don't know if you work directly with a 7-year-old, but if you were to sit with that 7-year-old, where do you focus there? Do you focus on that fear? Do you focus on like educating them on this not being their responsibility? Like, what do you advise to that 7-year-old Esin in that moment?
And what's so popular is inner child work, right? We talk about the inner child work. And so Matt has a little boy inside of him. MD has a little boy inside of him. I have a little girl inside of me, right? So even as we develop and all these other parts of us develop, right? Like, look at you guys are 2 years, you have a podcast, you're getting great guests on your podcast, you're having fun, you're on your own healing journeys, you're educating other people, you're having fun, you've created this thing, right, which is born out of curiosity and your own experience, but there's still always that younger part inside of us that hasn't caught up yet. And so it's this there's so many different modalities. Like Carl Jung calls it our shadow part, right? The parts of us that haven't gotten the proper healing. They didn't get the needs met that they needed at that age. A 7-year-old shouldn't have been responsible for an adult marriage. That's too much. And so there was unmet needs there. So what did I need at 7 years old is that I needed love, I needed attention, I needed to not be I needed to be a kid. I needed to not be parentified. I needed to not be responsible for an adult marriage. I needed to play. I needed to be attuned to, right? They needed to pay attention to me and my inner world if I was upset, but I was so focused on them. And so that inner child work comes down to this adult version of us giving that inner child that we all have, that younger part of ourselves, what it didn't get. Because there's unmet needs there. What didn't it get that it needs now? And so inner child in IFS, which is called internal family systems, we call it, there's all these parts. And the job of that modality is to unburden that part. So you basically bring up that part. So I would work with somebody, right? I would bring up the part. But what I care most about is the feelings that are associated with it, the emotional charge that's held in the body around that. People are always like, do I need to like go back to a particular moment and that's the only way I can resolve that? Do I need to go back? And I'm like, no. I'm like, I care more about when you get activated today, and that feeling that you feel, that is the memory coming up. That is the memory of that younger part coming up. And I always say, adults don't really throw temper tantrums. So when we throw a temper tantrum, it's usually that little kid inside that is like not getting their way or not getting a need met or not feeling seen or not feeling heard or feeling rejected, just like they did when they were 7 years old.
And so what does it mean, because I think I saw a post of yours, to feel stuck?
Oh.
Like what does that look like? I mean, I think people can kind of describe when they feel quote unquote stuck.
Yeah.
And then how do you get quote unquote
unstuck, right? Yeah. So you could get stuck in so many ways, right? You could go on a healing journey and read all these amazing books and read all these and watch every podcast and consume all of this knowledge. And you know it all, right? But what is the practical application of that knowledge? So if you have all this knowledge and you can't move the needle in terms of shifting how you feel, you get stuck. So I call that violence against yourself. So now I'm armed with, now I know all of this stuff. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so then, that makes sense why I'm anxiously attached. That makes sense why I'm avoidant in relationships. Okay, that's great. How do we move the needle? How do we actually get you to a place where you can, and the thing is that the nervous system doesn't understand cognitive language. You're not going to talk yourself out of shame. You're not going to talk yourself out of fear. You're going to move yourself out of fear, meaning you have to meet sensation with sensation. So you want to give it another experience. It's a corrective experience that needs to be felt on a felt sense level. So what I mean by that is, I'm going to try to make a very complex thing. I'm going to try to like simplify it. I have to be with a client, present and attuned with that person, and make them feel seen and heard, and track my own nervous system so that I can be present with them and allow them to bring up the activated part, the wounded part, the burdened part that's holding the pain. And you don't need to tell me it was at 6, 7, 8. You could just say, there's a younger part in there and I can feel it and I went through that. And in order to help you process that through to completion, I use different modalities like brain spotting. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of brain spotting. It's natural flow EMDR. So I'm basically using eye movement to basically help you access. So it's like bringing up the wounded part and then giving it a different experience. giving it a completely different experience. And that's called memory reconsolidation. So I can get it out of the subcortical part of your brain, which is a subconscious, which is connected to your brainstem, and that's what creates the charge in your body. So I want an emotional release of the charge, that energy is being held in your body. And so slowly, through me being with that part and being a compassionate, empathic witness to that part and allowing those feelings to be processed through to completion slowly, the energy releases. And so it becomes unburdened and excavated. But if you don't do that and you just read more books and you just do talk therapy and you just get more educated, then it's like, I have all this knowledge, but am I really internally shifting? And that's when people feel stuck. They feel like, I have all this knowledge and like I keep picking the same partners. I have all this knowledge and I'm still engaging in avoidant behavior. I have all this knowledge and I'm still conflict avoidant, or I'm still people pleasing, or I'm still causing myself pain, or I'm self-sabotaging. And so that's that stuck feeling. It's like, I feel like I can't get better, or I can't feel better for whatever reason. And I'm understanding why I got here. But that's what I like to help people with, like to move through that. So it's like meeting sensation with sensation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's, interestingly enough, a lot of where I feel like I've gotten to in my own quote unquote healing journey has been realizing that healing and wounds and emotional health is really physical. It's not just in your mind. And I too am a very deep thinker, very analytical, and I reached this point where the awareness, I think you had said this earlier about like, is it better to just be bliss? And it's like, the awareness is so there that like I realize where I'm struggling, where I'm suffering. I understand even why I am, but there is this period of stuckness that is there where I'm realizing that there really takes a physical component to this. And like, thanks to Matt here, like he's put me in touch with a breathwork coach, and it's like conscious connected breathing. I'm reading a book on trapped emotions, which I realize is reading a book, but I actually have to now do the actual work to mobilize, I guess, two things, right? Like move myself from being unstuck, but move the energy in a different way that you had just described. So yeah, I think that's like a huge part that was so unobvious to me, is just how physical emotional health really is.
And how that, so those parts, right, and all that knowledge you have and all that is holding an emotional energy, and so we have to move it through the body. So somatic is moving your body, of the body, right? So that's why I like cold plunge. That's why I like breathing exercises. That's why I like breath work. That's why I like meditation. That's why I like hot yoga. I happen to do all of those things and believe in them. And I think that the important piece is that stuck feeling happens to so many different people, where they're like, you get frustrated because you're like, I know it, but like, how do I move into that next level? How do I go and upgrade, or how do I feel differently? Because the ultimate goal is I want to feel different. I want to be the best version of myself. I want to be a more healed version of myself. Do I have attachment wounds, relational wounds? If you do, which most people do, right? We get wounded in relationships and we also heal in relationships. So it makes sense that a relationship with a coach or a friend, that you can heal in that relationship. Meaning, if I can have a corrective experience that is opposite from what injured me, if I was neglected and not seen and not heard and overly responsible, and now I'm relationally connecting to a therapist, a coach, a friend, and I'm being seen and I'm being heard and I'm being validated and I'm being held and I'm being co-regulated with, then it goes into the body as a felt experience. And that's the thing, we have to feel it. People are very disconnected from the mind and the body, right? We learn to disassociate and disembody when we don't like what we feel inside. So then we become all up in our head, and we can't intellectualize our way out of this. And we have to feel our way out of it. And I always say this, left brain is name it to tame it. It's the left part of your brain is very pragmatic, protocol oriented, logistical, logical. The right brain is the birthplace of creativity. It's joy. It's also emotions and feeling in that right part of that brain. So healing is a right brain endeavor. And how do you access right brain connected to the brainstem? Through the body.
And so what do you, I'm going to ask you kind of a question here, Esin.
Yeah.
Because you seem hyper self-aware, and you do practice a lot of different things, and obviously invest in yourself, your well-being. I think it'd be good for people to hear, like, where do you still struggle today?
So it's interesting because I call it like a whack-a-mole game, like in the arcade, you whack one thing down, you think you kind of have it, and then another thing pops up and another thing pops up. So it's kind of like I went into work, and so I became very like work focused, and then I experienced burnout for the first time. Again, dysregulated nervous system, right? Regardless of what it was. So in polyvagal theory, they talk about the different parts of the nervous system. You got the sympathetic nervous system, you got the ventral part of your nervous system, and you got dorsal. Ventral is what we long to be in. It's our natural state of being, which is the most regulated, most calm, most flexible. We're really flexible, we're spontaneous, we're playful. Dorsal shut down. And what happens is after a period of being so anxious or being in sympathetic, you shut down. And so my thing is balance. I've kind of understood what works for my body. I understand that when I'm doing cardio, which is Fit 45 classes in a heated room, I love heat. Temperature change for me is miraculous for my nervous system, right? So when I'm doing cold plunge at least 12 minutes a week, and I'm doing my sauna contrast, and I'm doing my hot yoga and my fit workouts, and I'm walking in nature, because nature is one of the best co-regulators, I have a much better handle, and I'm much more regulated, and I'm in the ventral part of my nervous system. That's what we all long to be in. But when I don't do those things and I overwork, or I dive into work as a distraction from having to deal with, right, like something tough that might come up for me, a relationship issue, an email that might have upset me, whatever it is, and I end up diving into work and I don't take that time to continue to maintain that regimen of what keeps me mentally healthy, then my anxiety flares up. And it's almost always followed. It's like up, I expect, so I kind of, you start to recognize your own patterns, and you start to recognize what works for me to keep my nervous system the most regulated. So I would say it was like anxiety into burnout, and then the burnout is kind of linked with that. So it's still the same thing, but now I'm aware of it and I know how to get myself out of it, if that makes sense.
Totally. Makes sense to me. I've become very much more aware of when I start to feel that way. And for me, I guess, I always take pretty good care of myself, but the thing that really helps me is some sort of mindfulness practice. That is really grounding, usually some form of breath work or meditation. But I remember I was at conferences the last 3 weekends, and talking all day, man, in a booth, talking to everybody, and then I'm presenting and spending a lot of energy at the end of the day. And I just felt myself, I remember I went up to my hotel room after a full day of basically being inside at a conference, and I walked up to my hotel room at 6 o'clock, and I had this feeling. I'm very intuitive, and I was like, I need to get outside. Like, something just doesn't feel right. And sure enough, I walk outside, and there's a beautiful park across the street. And I just walked through that thing, no headphones, no nothing. And I just immersed myself with the birds. I'm picturing it right now, and oh my gosh, it felt so healing. It was like exactly what I needed. And so usually it's some form. But I really like your point on just like finding what works for you, because I think what works for me is probably different than you and whoever's listening to this show. Yeah,
it's not a one size fits all, but you're basically regulated. You knew you basically co-regulated with nature. You tuned out the noise. You had so many energetic exchanges, right? And so you needed some peace, and you needed to be co-regulated in nature. And you knew to do that, right? It's like there's an intuition inside of us. It's like, I need to unplug. I need to pull back right now. I need to pull back. I need to get back into my breath work. I need to get back into my meditation if you have a meditation practice. I need to, I do yoga because it's a moving meditation. It's, breath and movement combined. That works for me. And so when I work with clients, I tailor a system for them that just because something is an evidence-based modality that works doesn't mean it's the right fit for you. So we kind of tweak it, and we try to see what works for one person doesn't work for another person. Like, some people, brain spotting is not for them. They can't get into it because brain spotting is mindfulness. It's a mindfulness journey. It's a internal, inward focus mindfulness journey where I have you use bilateral music. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of bilateral music. So you can go on Spotify, you could go anywhere and just Google bilateral music. Bilateral music basically goes between the right and left hemispheres of the brain, and it creates emotional regulation. And so I have people actually listen to that, and I ground them before we begin the brain spotting. Before we begin that work, I do the breath work with them in the beginning. So it's really, really individualized, but it's great that it's about learning what works for you. And is your microphone working, MD?
I don't know.
It is. I hear it. I hear you.
It? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Got you, brother.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, there's tech issues here.
Oh,
so I guess yeah. I mean, so I guess I saw another piece of content for you. It's about feeling free with discomfort. And so all to say that you still find your areas of discomfort. You still find moments of being dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
How have I guess elaborate on that point in terms of how would you explain what the freedom of feeling uncomfortable, what does that mean to you? How does that show up? So
feelings I used to run away from and be scared of, I'm able to sit with those feelings and be like, oh, I name it. I name it. I identify it. I recognize what's happening, and it passes through me quicker. So the more I'm able to sit in the discomfort, the more I'm able to sort of break up the energy, or disperse it. And so the ways that I move through it, and the freedom and the liberation, is that I can feel and move through an emotion, and I can transform it and alchemize it and transmute it, which I never could do before. So if I used to get dysregulated or anxious about something, I would ruminate and be upset about it for weeks. Now I can actually move through an emotion and a feeling that's uncomfortable. Healing doesn't mean that you don't get activated. Healing doesn't mean that you're not going to get triggered or awakened, or you're not going to get upset, or you're not going to get depressed, or you're not going to get anxious. It means, how do you move through it? There's an acceptance and a compassion for what I feel when I notice that I'm feeling that, and I can sit with that, right? And so when you feel compassion for the discomfort that you are going through, it sends a message to your nervous system. It literally changes your whole entire internal physiology. Just that act of being compassionate to yourself. And if you can't access it for yourself, think about someone you love, that if they told you they were feeling anxious, or they were feeling uncomfortable, or they were feeling worried, how would you feel towards them? You wouldn't be mad at them. You wouldn't be like, what's wrong with you? You would want them to feel better. You would want to help. And so you extend that compassion to yourself and say, yeah. And then I always say this. I always say, when else have I felt like this before? I always bring it back to where, so there's still, because some wounds take longer to close than others. That's just the way it works. And sometimes you have to let go of something over 1,000 times until it's really unburdened. And so the more I sit with it, the more I actually ask if there's anything it wants me to know about why it's feeling so dysregulated. I like ask if there's anything it wants me to know. And I don't, not with the thinking mind, but with when I ask that question and I'm in the right brain, which is like emotions, and I'm actually in the feeling, it's called felt sense. I'm allowing my body to fully feel and marinate in the discomfort. It gives me answers. It says, this is what's been happening. And it's not the intellectual part of my brain. So then what I do is, it's called sifting. And it's a term from Dan Siegel. And it's called sensation, image, feeling, and thought. And you did it before, Matt. You started talking about when you had that conference and you had all of these energetic exchanges. You realized, I need to get outside, and you went and co-regulated with nature. And even when you were recalling it to me, you were telling me how good it felt and how freeing, or how, I don't know, alive I would call that, or how regulating it felt, right? So the sensation, the image, the feeling, and the thought sift that you felt when you went and did that, I'm going to call it your nature excursion, and you went out there and free, bringing that in when you're dysregulated. So now I can be dysregulated, I can be anxious, I can be upset, and I'm going to bring in that sifted experience that I already had, and that's going to cradle the discomfort that I'm feeling. I have access to that at any moment to bring in, because you experienced it already, Matt. You have a sifted experience. So if you bring that, you're like, I could recall what I felt like. I'm like, good, tell me more about that. What was the sensation when you were there? What was the image? What was the feeling? What was the thought? And so if you bring that in, now we have two different nervous system states at the same time happening. You're bringing in a regulated experience, and it starts to cradle the discomfort. So you're able to kind of internally self-soothe and create what's called an internal attachment figure. You're actually creating an internal attachment figure. You're learning to self-soothe yourself with an experience that you had, because Matt's adult embodied self was who knew inherently, he knew to get out and go co-regulate with nature. So you bring that experience back into your body, and you meet it with the discomfort, and it starts to dissipate it. Does that make sense?
Totally. What would you say, Esin? Thanks for using me as an example.
Of course.
I did bring myself back there for a moment. What do you say to people that are resistant to therapy or resistant to healing?
I work with the resistant parts. And so that's the biggest thing with that's the biggest thing with the IFS. You know, I have people that are like, you know what, therapy doesn't work. I've been to a bunch of different therapists. I think this is who I am. I'm never going to change. And I'm like, well, neuroplasticity and neuroscience says otherwise. So you're challenging the fact that we have the ability to rewire our nervous system regardless of what we've been through. So what I do, though, is I can't force somebody to do the work. And if they're resistant, then I want to work with the resistant part. So that's really what IFS is. It's parts work. We have all these different parts, right? Is there a part of you that wants to get up early, drink a green juice, and go for a jog, and then another part of you that wants to sleep in? So just like we have body parts, we have an internal ecosystem of different parts. We have an inner critic, right? Our inner critic sometimes can be mean to us, but it serves a purpose, right? Maybe it makes us get stuff done. If I'm mean enough to you, or I'm like, get yourself together. So it's really like working with the parts. And if there's a resistant part coming up, it's like, what's the resistance about? What's in that part? And they're like, I just don't believe I can change. I just believe that this is my lot in life. And I believe that too much has happened in my life that I don't think it's so deeply embedded that it feels impossible. And I go, and that makes so much sense that it would feel like that. And so I've literally asked, what does that resistant part feel like? And they're like, it feels like a total block. It feels like, and I'm like, describe it to me. And they'll be they're like, it's like a brick. You're not getting through it. It's impenetrable. And so I think slowly they start to trust as we build a relationship, right? The goal is to build a relationship and to get and create a secure attachment. And then that resistance, when I work with that resistant part, it starts to soften. And then it spontaneously emerges. So I almost ask, would that resistant part be willing to step back for a second so we could get underneath what's underneath that resistance? Because there's something underneath that resistance. And it's fear, it's shame, it's, imposter syndrome, it's woundedness. And if I resist, I don't really have to hit that stuff. I don't really have to confront that stuff.
You taking a little bit of a pivot.
Sure. Pivot
one
away.
of the earliest things you had mentioned was you can't selectively numb, and you'll numb the pain, but you'll numb everything along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think I've been experiencing was I've been fully numb before. I mean, just about fully, where I had trouble feeling any of the emotions, especially on more of the positive side. And so I've Googled how do I feel joy and how do I feel love and how do I feel some of these emotions. And I guess my question to you is is there a sort of tolerance to some of these feelings? Because what I've noticed is as I've been able to feel more and feel more love, it's pretty easy to make me cry now. And within the last 6 months, I would say, or 12 months, even some of the simplest acts of love can make me feel very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, is that because it's what's the science on that? Is there a lot of pent up? Is that just a low tolerance to this? I'm trying to better understand that for myself.
So if you're telling me that you've been numb for the majority of a lot of your, a lot of the thing is maybe being disconnected from feeling, right? Because you learned a long time ago, it wasn't safe in your body. It wasn't safe to feel. It was too overwhelming. It was too much. So you disconnected. And so now you're getting back into connection, right? Into feeling those things. And you can't, like you said, selectively numb. So you're going to start to feel more emotional. You're going to start to feel, the multitude of emotions. You're going to feel a little more sensitive. You're going to start, because it's almost like these feelings are kind of coming back alive that you disconnected from and disembodied from, but they've always been there. So yes, they've been pent up, and yes, they want to be expressed. And yes, it will feel like, I remember when I first started connecting more, I would cry at a Snuggies commercial. And I'm like, I can't be crying at a Snuggies commercial. It was the little guy bouncing onto the air freshener. I'm like, I'm crying at this commercial? Am I unstable and am I unhinged or something? It's no, because I start to feel again. And so then what happens is that it feels disproportionate to the context, right? It's well, this shouldn't elicit a cry, or I shouldn't be so emotional in this arena, or it's because you're coming back to connection. You're getting more connected with your body. So what you're talking about is a window of tolerance, right? So what you're doing is you're slowly building nervous system capacity to handle more and more emotions. And so if your window of tolerance was not that big before, because you were so disconnected, it's you would emotionally get flooded. So you learned to shut that part of yourself off, and you learned how to, and I call that disassociation, disembodiment, numbing, whatever you want to call it. Checked out, tuned out, right? I'm tuning out from what I'm feeling in my body. Getting back to being reconnected with feelings and emotions and all of that. Yeah, your window of tolerance won't be that high. So what I always recommend to people is titration. And how beautiful is that, MD, that you're starting to feel again? How beautiful is that? Scary yet beautiful, right? That you're able. I was numb for so long, but now I'm able to cry. Now I feel sensitive. Now I feel joy. Now I feel compassion. Now I can access love inside of me. And remember, compassion is love in action, right? Compassion for yourself and for other people. And so I think it's building the window of tolerance to be able to tolerate more and more emotion is called titration. And so what it is the more difficult things that you do, now I'm going to get really nerdy. On the left part of your brain, back here, it's called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, the AMCC. And that part of your brain is responsible for longevity and to keep you, it's responsible for longevity, and it grows, it's largest in athletes. And it grows with the more difficult things that you do. And so what's difficult for me is not what's difficult for Matt. What's difficult for Matt's not what's difficult for MD, right? Like if it's easy for me to go in the cold plunge, I'm not building my anterior mid-cingulate cortex. But if it's hard for me and I do it and I push through it, I've just increased that part of my brain, which has also increased my window of tolerance. So it has to be like doing hard things. If it's hard for me to feel, because I'm so used to being disconnected, when I start to feel an emotion, it's like, oh my God, so I tell people to titrate with that and slowly incorporate and let their body get used to feeling joy and feeling sensitive, and it's okay, and it might come out at inopportune moments. The best way I describe it is like this. I ask you, MD, to go to an island, right? And you are like, I'm most comfortable under the coconut tree, in the shade. I don't want to be around a lot of people. I don't want a lot of interaction. I don't want to have to feel too much. I'm most comfortable over there. So I said, and I get that. And that makes so much sense based on everything that you've experienced. Would you be willing to walk over to the dock? And so through titration, so the dock would be a metaphor for accessing a different feeling, right? To go get in touch. So you'd kind of walk over to the deck, and then I'd have you go back under the tree. And then I'd have you go back over to the deck and then back under the tree. That's what I'm doing. It's called pendulation. And so I'm having you access through slow titration, really being with those feelings. And then I'm going to say, now when you're on that deck, right? Can you dip your toe in the water just a little bit? I know you don't want to jump in. Can you just feel what the water feels like a little bit? And you feel it. I'm like, now go back to the deck. Now your new normal becomes the deck, and you're no longer underneath the tree with the coconuts because you titrated back and forth and back and forth. And I'm going to eventually want you to get on a boat and go to the other islands too. There's a bunch of other places I want you to visit, but not yet. Because I want the capacity. I want your anterior mid-cingulate cortex to build up. I want you to do hard things slowly. You don't want to do things too fast. The best way I could describe it is if you go get a tan in one day and you become like so dark, you're going to probably burn and peel, right? It won't last. But if you get tan slowly over time, most likely it's going to last. So if you titrate with that and just say, this is part of the healing journey, I'm feeling, and you know what? And I'm really like having a different relationship to your emotions. So becoming the witnesser of your emotions, right? Like if I can't be my emotion of what I'm feeling and the witnesser. It's like you can't be both. So if I start to witness, wow, I'm sensitive. I'm feeling some love. What's going on over here? I've been numb for like years. It's going to get scary because your nervous system will always want familiar. It will always go to familiar because familiar means safe. It could be abuse, it could be numbness, disassociation, workaholism, self-sabotage. As long as it's familiar, your nervous system knows what to do to it, or knows how to deal with it, rather. When you start to like go into uncharted territory where you're like, oh my God, this is new, your nervous system literally has a self-protective mechanism. It goes, warning, warning, danger, danger. This is not familiar. Because it searches your internal database in a millisecond. And it goes, when else have I had this experience before? It goes, I haven't. Shit. I don't know how to hold this. I don't know how to hold this. I don't know how to be with this. And so you're going to want to escape it. That's why pendulation is feel it, have gratitude for it, and then go back under the tree, right? So that's titration, pendulation. So I do that. It's Peter Levine.
Yeah, we had him on.
Oh, you did? I love him. He's one of my
Yeah.
he's one of my teachers. So I took his somatic course with Gabor Mate and in California, and I'm part of the Embody Lab. So I take a lot of their courses, like Dr. Scott Lyons and like all of them. And so Peter Levine is the creator of somatic experiencing, which I study, and he is all about the emotional discharge of the body, right? Waking the Tiger. One of the main stories was this woman came to him with panic attacks, and she couldn't, and he didn't know what to do. He was trying to help her. She was almost like agoraphobic. I don't know if you guys know what agoraphobic is, but your anxiety gets so bad that you don't leave the house because everything is a trigger. And so what ends up happening is that you just want to stay safe. And so if you got a panic attack at the grocery store, you don't want to go to the grocery store anymore. If you got anxious or a panic attack in the car, you don't want to drive anymore. Now your world starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so you get stuck, right, in that because you don't ever want to feel that panic attack ever again because it was mortifying and terrifying and you thought you were dying, because it literally feels like death to your nervous system. So when she was talking about the anxiety, he was like, run, chase the tiger up the tree. And so there was a mobilizing energy. So she got out of it because she literally like moved. You stay stuck, and that's called immobilization, right? So mobilization is moving through it to take that action. And so she imagined and visualized chasing the tiger, and that created a mobility in her energy. And there was a there was a release there. So, and then one more quick story. I know I'm a big talker, but I think this is helpful. There was a story about these kids got kidnapped by, I don't know the like specifics, but they got kidnapped and they got put under an underground building, and they were held captive there, and the kids were afraid. And there was this one kid who saw a light, and he saw that it wasn't very well built, like it looked like they built it, and he saw a light and he clawed his way out, and then he started rescuing the children, but the kids were frozen in fear, right? Because when you get scared, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. The kids were frozen in fear. He was the only one out of all those kids that didn't have PTSD. Because it's not about the trauma, it's not about the wounds, it's about he mobilized, he moved, he took action. So instead of staying frozen, he forced himself, he became like this, like he created a pathway out, and then also was like brought the frozen kids with him. And when they did this longitudinal study down the line and they reached out to him, he was the only one that didn't experience post-traumatic stress disorder. It didn't live on with him because he mobilized. And so it's literally, you get to do that in somatic experiencing. You get to do that in energy work. You get to do that with breath work. You get to release the emotional energy that is attached to the wounding. And you do it there's so many different ways. IFS is a way to do it, working with the parts. It's called unburdening. In somatic experiencing, there's pendulation and releasing that pent up energy. I mean, there's so many different, in brain spotting, it's activating the wounded part intentionally and giving it a different experience, and then reconsolidating the memory so it no longer has a charge. So for instance, I've had panic attacks. I don't know if you guys have had them before, but I remember the first panic attack I had, oh my God, in college. That was one of the warning signs. Like, the alcohol's a depressant, right? You keep drinking something that's a depressant, what's going to happen is it's going to affect your chemicals. It's going to affect your GABA. GABA is your calming neurotransmitter. And so you're depleting it and you're playing with it. You're going to get anxious. That's what hangovers are. It's like you literally have a reduction in neuro whatever. So I had my first panic attack, and you never want to feel that ever again because you feel like you're dying and like the walls are closing in on you, and then you end up avoiding anything that is reminiscent. And I got it in a dorm room. I was in a dorm room. That was my first panic attack. And so once I experienced that, I wouldn't want to be in elevators. And so I did my own work with EMDR and brain spotting, and I reprocessed that memory. So I still remember Like, I can recall it to you now when I had that panic attack, but I have no emotions associated with it. I can recall it to you as just a memory and an experience of what I had, but I reprocess the memory and discharge the energy around it. And I can go in dorm rooms, and I can go in elevators, and I can go in enclosed spaces. But my brain associated the dorm room that was small with enclosed spaces, that I can't be in that or I'll get another panic attack. And so I reprocess that memory to completion through EMDR. That I'm telling you the story. Do I seem activated in any way, shape, or form? Is it like, oh, I might get another one? No, because I reprocessed it. So that's why it's like, I believe so much that you can change, because I've experienced it. And the thing is I think that the people who help other people that are the most effective, it's not even all the modalities they're trained in, it's that they've done their own work. You can't illuminate a path for someone unless you've walked. It doesn't have to be the same story. But how can I illuminate a path for you if I haven't experienced or gone through my own healing work and understood, and I've actually felt it, experienced it, so I believe in it. Like, I've experienced it, so then I'm going to be able to help somebody more because I believe in it, because I've experienced it and I've gotten the emotional release. And I think that resonates.
Yeah, well said. I'll say this: I didn't do the titration, whatever it was called.
Yeah,
I didn't do any of that. I jumped right in, because I struggled, it was my sexuality, and so when I came out, there was just this initial, like, overwhelming flow of emotions that just snapped me. But it was good. It was a relief. But Esin Pinarli, everybody. Esin, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.